Hey everyone, welcome back to the FloTrack podcast. FloTrack podcast at gmail.com is our email address. If you'd like to write in, we appreciate all comments, questions, and feedback. My name is Kevin Sully, joined by Lincoln Shrike. Good morning, Lincoln. How are you?
I'm good. It was supposed to be me and Gordon today, but he opted out. I didn't know we could do that. What's going on?
He pulled well, it's Boston Marathon Day. You guys know more about marathons than I do, so you should probably take it. Which I got to be honest, Lincoln, uh, that kind of snuck up on me because since everything got canceled, I have no concept of when events are. So I didn't even realize that today was going to be Boston Marathon Day.
Uh, I, I think I was somewhat aware of it, but in the same way, it definitely snuck up because it still feels like it's March in some ways. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Everything feels one continuous day. There really is no night and day other than darkness and light. Everything
Whoa.
is still. Yeah, I know that sounded deeper than it truly was. But yeah, it definitely snuck up, and it you know it's weird to think that it would have been today, but it doesn't. It wouldn't have felt right to have it just because our lives have been so thoroughly altered. Of course, it's going to be in September now, which we'll just hold on to. Hopefully that date stays there, and we can still have a Boston Marathon. But it'll look totally different not having it in April. And so I guess today we can at least commemorate some of our favorite races and at least the most memorable moments.
Definitely. Definitely. There's going to be some recency bias, which is a ongoing theme here, I feel like, on this pod. That's what
Mm-hmm.
we probably should rename it that, recency bias.
Yep.
Um, because of our ages, we're probably not going to delve too much in the 80s and 90s just because, listen, you guys want to hear us talk about things that we remember, not things we
Yeah.
read about on Wikipedia. We're not going to talk about Bill Rogers winning a bunch. He was great. The duel against Alberto Salazar, that was obviously awesome. Catherine Ndareba winning a lot back in the day, which
Mm-hmm.
shot her to the top of your marathon ultimate rankings, I believe. Right? That's
She's since been passed, but yes. Yeah,
yeah,
she's since
yeah.
been
So
passed.
I mean, you were out there last year, so
Mm-hmm.
you've been out there more recently than I have. I was out there in 2018. I zeroed in on 4 races, 4 years of the race: 2011, 2013, 2014, and 2018 that really stand out to me for vastly different reasons. But I mean, I guess is there any year that really sticks out to you as being significant?
I mean, you mentioned one of them. 2018 was clearly uh, not only the recency thing, but yeah, I mean, an American winning for the first time on the women's side since 1985. Yuki Kawauchi winning, it being a complete monsoon, that stands out. And again, that was only 2 years ago. 2011 stands out as well in my memory for how fast it was. So, and then I mean, unfortunately, I'm getting knocks at the door here. I just told my son that I was going to be in here. It took him all of 2 minutes to
Well,
start
he
breaking my
maybe
will.
he I think he wants you to. I think he wants you to start in 2011. I think that's what the sign
Mm-hmm.
was. Your son says, "Dad, I wasn't around in 2011. I don't even remember Jeffrey Mutai's career. I thought Boston was a record eligible course. Break it down. Why was 2011 so significant?"
Well, let me wait to do that here while we have a second. Hey, son, what's up, man?
I want to try something.
Okay, remember I told you not to come in?
Yeah, but
Yeah, but
Nicely, though, as a very appropriate and respectful dad. Can you, what do you need, dude?
I need to watch my video.
He needs me to watch his video with him. Not right now. I'm doing
interesting.
it.
No, watch it while you do.
Oh, okay. Okay, why don't you pause it and then you can go in?
I did.
Okay. Okay, thank you. See you in a minute. Well, folks back home, that's how you dad, if anyone's curious. So promise to watch it with
Potting
him.
while dadding.
Yeah. 2011.
Yeah, that's where we
Uh,
were.
the world record at the now I know Boston's not course eligible or whatever you want to say, but the world record at the time was still like Haile Gebrselassie 203.59. So the concept of someone in Boston running, what was it, 203.02, 203.01 by Jeffrey Mutai. I know
Oh,
the
two.
tailwind
Yeah.
was, yeah, I know the tailwind was there, but that was just a jaw dropper has stood the test of time, even in the era of Kipchoge and people running 201 and 202. I mean, that's still one of the most impressive marathon performances of all time.
Yeah, and I don't think that many people knew that Boston wasn't record eligible. Like, I think obviously the real big stat heads out there knew that, but there was no real reason that you would have if you were a casual fan, or I think I didn't even really recognize it because there's so many rules and regulations and stuff in running because of the nature of the course. It wasn't going to be record eligible. Now, this became clear really early on that it was the perfect day. You had the net downhill and then the point-to-point nature. They got the tailwind behind him, but it wasn't just Mutai. I remember Moses Mosop, who went on later that year to run a 30K at the pre-classic, which was thrilling to watch, I should add. If you think a 10K is fun, buckle up for a 30K. 203.06. So he was right there with him as well. It's interesting to look at these times, though, and I remember how eye-popping 203.02 looked on the screen, and now that's just like, oh, okay. Like, if someone did that now, even if someone did that now in Boston, I feel like people would say, hey, that's a solid run, but I don't think they'd be like, well, clearly this can't count. Clearly there was something wrong with the weather, right? Clearly there was this huge advantage.
Well, I mean, it would just cause pandemonium as in regards to the shoes. It doesn't matter if the person was not wearing Vaporfly or Alphaflies or whatever. It would just cause this groundswell of controversy, as is everything. Now, I've missed that controversy because we haven't had it for a couple months. Didn't realize how much I would truthfully go for it. But yeah, it was a different era even 9 years ago. Not just with the times, but just our response to records and fast times. And of course, on the American side, Ryan Hall broke 205. I mean, that just indicates how fast it was. I was actually just watching back the video this morning, just kind of the NBC edit on YouTube of the video, and Ryan Hall crosses the finish line. He crosses on the women's side of things, or on the women's finish line, and the announcer, the commentator, they're excited about his performance, and the clock reads 2:32, and the announcer goes, 2:32? What is... Okay, hold on. Yep. Okay, bring the iPad to me. This is peak level. If you're wondering, why isn't my wife dealing with it? My wife is 25 weeks pregnant, as you probably know, Kevin. And she had an appointment today, and we decided to go on a solo mission wearing the 1 in 95 mask that we have as a family. And so I'm pulling double duty here. Let me pass this around back here. And so the iPad...
I'm excited to hear the punchline of this. You kind of left it hanging there with the commentator saying 2:32. But I will say this.
Go ahead, dude.
I mean, Ryan Hall running 2:05 and running the race. Ryan Hall running the race of his life there and running under 2:05. It was tough to conceptualize it, though, in real time. But continue. What were you saying? How did that story end up?
Oh, listen, everyone likes to deride, national broadcast announcers that are, pulled into the marathon or whatever, track and field, whenever it's not their routine thing. But I just thought it was a genuinely funny moment. I think it was Alan Troutwig, who was...
Al Troutwig.
Yeah, Al Troutwig, sorry. Watching the moment and just looked at the clock and said 2:32 and was genuinely confused for a second. Wait a second. And you get caught up in everything when you're announcing. There's so many things. You also have the women's race going on, but it just seemed like for a second he was like, wait, did 30 minutes just pass by between Jeffrey Mutai and it was just that's it. It wasn't a great joke, and obviously the joke, the pause with my son there broke up some of the humor there. But anyways, that's all I had. It was just a genuinely funny moment.
I think it made it better. I mean, I do remember obviously Hall running that fast. The gap being, because there was about a minute and a half gap back to Geber-Merriam, and then Hall was just a few seconds behind Geber-Merriam. I don't remember it being, I guess, that big of a gap, but still to go under 2:05. On the women's side of things, though, this was a crazy year all around, right? Because the women's side of things, Des Linden, who at the time Desiree Davila, almost won the whole thing.
Yeah,
which would have been a huge upset because Linden in 2011 was not the Linden we know today. She had run some really good marathons. She had shown some promise, but she was having the race of her life and was in it all the way down to the final stretch. Doesn't ultimately get it. Caroline Kalel gets her by 2 seconds, but my word. Both. I mean, that was a year. Some years you only get one of the races delivering. That year, both of them, you had so much to watch for from an American perspective and just a overall race perspective.
Yeah, and it's now that she's had so much success, you look back and you say, "Oh, that makes sense." But that was quite the breakthrough, obviously, for the time for her to get second in that race. Lyndon, that is, and how old would she have been in that one? Was she 25, 26? I mean, that's unheard of. I mean, now we have Molly Seidel making the team at 25, and that was making the Olympic team, and that was a tremendous breakthrough, and it was almost of the level, if not more, when Lyndon finished second in 2011, and a preview of basically of things to come. This year would have been her 8th Boston Marathon. She's a mainstay, and she's that consistency in Boston, she's kept that going. And 2011 was kind of a preview of that. I mean, God, when she ran her first Boston, would have been like 2007. I mean, she's been at this for a long time. The women's version of Meb, basically.
She had a good Chicago before this, so she was on the radar a bit, but it was still okay. This person in this crazy colored jersey is hanging in, and Kara Goucher ran 2:24.50 in that race, so a couple minutes back, but she ended up getting 5th, so it wasn't a bad race for her either. I saw Lyndon point this out on Twitter. 2nd, 3rd, and 4th in that race all went on to win the Boston Marathon at some point in their career, because she did,
really?
Sharon Cherop did, and Caroline Rotich did.
Oh,
yeah,
that's good. Yeah, I was there in 2015 when Rotich won. That's it. That's the end of that story. But yeah,
there was a stretch when I was looking at the results. There was a stretch there where the women's race was decided by 3 or fewer seconds, like 4 years in a row.
Yeah. The women or the men finally kind of had an exciting finish after, I don't know, less than memorable. I mean, last year's finish was incredible on the men's side, but it seemed like that hadn't been the case. I don't want to jump around too much, but watching Meb's performance back this morning, I forgot how close it had gotten in the last 2 miles between him and Chibet. I mean, we all remember, and then when you watch him finish, Chibet had kind of faded back, but that gigantic margin that was kind of in the middle, not the middle miles, but the second half miles of the race had shrunk considerably, and there was real chance even down, coming on to Hereford and Boylston that he was going to get caught. And I had forgotten that. I know it's been 6 years, and things you definitely forget things, and like I forget what it's like to take a shower every day, of course, but I just had let go of the fact that wasn't a certainty going into the last couple of miles. I had remembered it as, he had that in the bag the last couple of miles, but not at all the case. He had to work really, really hard to secure that victory.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know if you could poll everybody, what's the most interesting way a marathon plays out? Because yes, it's fun to have people going back and forth like Kabete and Wanjiro did that year in Chicago, and Tony Revis is losing his voice and they're just throwing punches at each other, like surge after surge, and someone gets dropped. But to me, I almost think it's the situation where someone gets a big lead and you're wondering if they can hang on. It's Jaws, right? There's a swimmer in the ocean. Can they get out? Can they get to the boat in time before they get completely eaten alive? And this was the perfect example of it, because Meb sort of just like skittered out there, if I'm remembering it correctly. He just slipped away, and the lead grew and grew and grew and grew and grew. And obviously there's a great story there about the Americans in the chase pack not mounting a surge, not trying to take the lead, almost cycling-esque, where they wanted someone to take on the pace to cut the lead, to do the work, and they didn't. They waited because they wanted to give Meb a clean breakaway because of what that race meant. And then by the time, was it Chibet and was it Chep Kawani who was in that as well? I feel like
that sounds familiar.
Yeah, Franklin Chep Kawani, who ended up finishing in 3rd. It was too late. But yeah, Meb's Meb, I mean, I don't have the splits in front of me, but that lead was dwindling, and then I
Yep.
think finally with like, was it a K to go or 2K to go? Finally, it steadied because all the work that Chibet had to do to claw back and get it
Yeah.
finally took a toll.
Yeah, well, they went under a bridge. I think the Massachusetts Avenue Bridge, and it was clear. And I think the announcer correctly pointed out that Chibet had basically emptied the canister to try to catch up, and he was going to have no more gears left. And Meb, to his credit, I think from 25 to 26, or maybe 24 to 25, threw in a sub 5 mile, and that pretty much it must have been to 26. That pretty much ended it. And then he was accelerating all the way to the finish line. Yeah, such a storied race coming back after 2013. Any race, a successful race, anybody finishing anywhere and obviously having no incidents would have been a successful story in 2014 after what happened in 2013. But for an American to win was just absolutely storybook. And then I think, Greg Meyer being there at the finish line and Meb, I watched it back today and definitely got chills as he crossed the finish line, and just the emotion of him screaming. You kind of know him as being a quiet and just a thoughtful guy, but like letting his emotions rip there. Somebody who had been, he was about to turn 39 at that point. We think of him as this ageless guy, but even then, he was getting up there. And he mentioned, I think in the post-race thing, he was thinking his career was over just like a couple years before that. So it was just, it's probably the Boston Marathon moment for me. I mean, I know that's an easy one, but that defines it for me. I remember I was watching it on my cell phone at a job I had that I wasn't supposed to be watching it. But the year before at that job, it was surreal. We didn't usually watch TV at that job, but our boss rolled a TV in the year before as the manhunt was going on, and we were watching a video of the boat that the suspect was hiding out on underneath or wherever he was. So the juxtaposition of, not saying that healed it or anything, but it definitely went a long way to providing some relief after the year. Just the comparison of those 2 years, and for it to happen 1 year later was definitely a little bit of magic.
He had the names of the victims written on his bib. I remember watching it in disbelief for 2 levels. One, oh man, someone who makes a surge that early in a marathon of this quality, they'll get reeled in. Doesn't matter who they are. And then the second level of disbelief was, how is Meb going to do this? Meb, if you look at his career, he's had the valleys and he's had the peaks, right? And every time you think he's done for and this is it and you're going to see him slowly fade away, he drops one of these things, or he finishes 4th in the Olympics. Like, he always has a response. And in a way, it was obvious that he was going to be the one who was going to do this, right? Talk about meeting the moment, right? I mean, Meb did it time and time again in his career and figured out a way to do it. Some interesting, and I also, you look back after though, and it makes sense. And he's a smart guy, right? Kometo, the big guy in this race. Well, Kometo was really inexperienced and was a flat course guy, right? His fast time came in Chicago. Then I think DeCisa dropped out in the early miles. And I don't know if Meb was keeping tabs on him that closely. But I think once those 2 big guys kind of parted the way, any confidence that he was lacking, and I don't believe he was lacking any confidence, but the field at that point got especially beatable for him. But it's one thing to have that field in front of you, and it's the other thing to actually do it and do it in that manner. I mean, that was the most dramatic way possible to do that race in the most dramatic of years. I mean, I just remember thinking, of course it was Meb. Like, of course, that was like right in front of our face the entire time, that this guy was going to be the one who, a year after a terrorist attack at a major marathon, wins it, because the dude is just, he's storybook. That's just the way you put it. Like, he is storybook through and through. The year prior, though, you mentioned watching that at work. Like I have pretty vivid memories of 2013. Of course, I was on the West Coast, so it starts earlier in the day. I was employed at the time, but I must have worked from home because I needed to work from home that day. You know, I had to take care of some bits. So my dad was running it the first and only time he had run the Boston Marathon. And I remember I watched the race. It was over, and I was in line. I went to the supermarket, and I remember exactly where I was in line at the exact supermarket when I checked my phone, and someone said that there was explosion at the finish line, and I just was complete shock. And then that set off obviously several days of just confusion over the whole thing. And do you remember the video of when the bomb went off and there's an older gentleman running and I think he's in like a bright orange singlet and he gets knocked to his feet and he gets back up and he just that image was stuck in my head for so like I could not stop watching that.
Yeah, and I think of the guy who had his legs. I'm sure there were multiple, but the guy who had his legs blown off in the wheelchair, getting pushed, covered in ash and whatnot. That obviously hit home for you. Your dad was unharmed by that, but what was his experience with that?
He had already finished. So then people were saying like, "Oh man, it's a good thing you ran the time you did." Like if you were, and I don't even remember. And you made the comment before about the commentator losing track of time. And I think that was obviously sarcastic, but in a marathon, you kind of do lose track of time. Like anybody who's ever finished one, you finish and then there's this you're already a little disoriented and out of it. Then there's this long winding road to get your stuff, to find the people that you're there. And if you're getting back, like, so the timeline, I guess you could go back and look at when he started and when he finished and figured it out, but he had crossed the finish line well before that. It wasn't like a 5-minute thing. It was closer to a half hour, maybe even more. But yeah, we were freaked. My mom was in a separate area, like trying to find him. I believe I don't know if my sister was out there as well too. I forgot about it, but the cell phone service was down. Like he wasn't running with his phone, so he didn't know. Nobody knew the extent of this. So it was just very hard to get any information out of there.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I remember when I finally went to Boston in 2018, and I'm curious to know if this was your impression too. I went down to the finish line and I was just surprised at how small that area is, how confined that finishing zone. We think, oh, it's a major street in the middle of a huge city. It's going to be this big wide boulevard. And it's not. It's one of those things that you see on TV and you think is going to be larger than life. So just to imagine the chaos and confusion there in such a confined space really gives you a sense of just how bad things were and maybe even how they could have gotten even worse.
Yeah, it's. I mean, so many people pack when they have those rails up and they're cordoning things off for the race. So many people pack onto those sidewalks, and it's real tiny because there's buildings and businesses right there. And I didn't have a perspective of that until it's weird to think I was there in 2015 because that was only 2 years after, and that felt like a different world. And I mean, I think in some ways that the 2014 race was exactly the healing that I think the city and the race needed. Because I mean, of course, a year after a terrorist attack, there's still anxiety of, is there going to be copycats? Is it safe to have? I mean, things like this change your perspective and change the way we think of large events where it just takes one person and it kind of threatened to ruin the I don't want to say the innocence of the race as a whole, but thankfully they seemingly figured out the security and like I said, Meb winning was a big healing moment, I think, for the entire city. But the city of Boston really bandied together, and I didn't know. I mean, any city I think would respond like that, but it did seem like Boston became really, really strong and in the wake of this. And it's tough to put it into words. You don't want to say it like it made the Boston Marathon more special, because that could kind of take away from the victims' experiences. But just the response to it, I think, makes the race more storied and makes the day more special each time that it's run. So again, a bummer to not have it this year.
Well, you brought up the boat, right? I mean, my parents were planning on staying after, and then so they're staying in the city, and then the whole city essentially goes on lockdown for a little bit, and there was all sorts of confusion when this manhunt is going on. I remember was it a police officer in Cambridge, I want to say, or a security guard was killed during that manhunt as well too. I mean, this wasn't just as horrible as that Monday was. It extended. It wasn't just over at that point. There was
I think it was
real
a week,
feeling of
week later. It was like a week, right? Or was it 5 days? Or I mean, it was a long time.
I don't remember. Yeah, I mean, it certainly felt like a while, and I wasn't even there. So it was just it was surreal, and you can't have Boston Marathon without the crowd. That's what makes it the Boston Marathon. That's what everybody talks about the whole way there, right? All the way from the start. There's these great crowds that line the street, and in the finish, obviously, is the apex of the race. So that event really cuts against this whole idea. So I was happy that the next year they were able to bounce back, for lack of a better word. I know that's cliche at this point when we talk about horrible events, but Meb doing it and people feeling safe and secure and able to go out there and run the race. I mean, there was a lot of post 2013 pieces written, basically people saying, well, if you think this is going to make runners back down, like, you don't know runners. Like, they're just not gonna, like, nothing's going to keep them from going out next year and trying to run the race, particularly in that field. Certainly the results of that race are completely forgotten. Do you remember anything about who won?
I mean, I definitely remember that Lalisa DeCisa won, and if I'm not mistaken, he donated his didn't he donate his winner's check to the families of the victims, or what was it exactly?
I know he donated his medal to the city. I don't know about the money, but I'm not. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, okay. Well, I always remember DeCisa won. I do not remember who won on the women's side in that race, but yeah, for that reason, I remember DeCisa won.
Rita Jeptu.
Oh, okay. Well, good. I'm glad I had forgotten that. Yeah.
She won again in 2014, but she got DQ'd in 2014. She didn't get DQ. She's still in the results for 2013, but 2014. Do I have that right? Because my results say Buzinesh Deba crossed the line first, but I'm pretty sure it was Jeptu, and then she's since been disqualified, because Deba now has the course record despite finishing second in that race.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Jeptu was on quite a run. There was a reason for that. But yeah, I had no memory of what had happened, really. I mean, the race was just so insignificant. And after what had happened, yeah, that's not at all what you think of first there. But
yeah, so I'm looking up. I'm looking at just double checking on 2014. Yeah, she ran 2:18:57, which would have been the course record. So she beat Deba by over a minute, but Deba broke the old course record as well too. Shalane Flanagan was sixth in that race, Lincoln.
Mm-hmm.
In 2014. In 2013, the year of the Jeptu won that one as well. Jeptu ran 2:26:25. Flanagan was fourth with 2:27:08. So not that far behind.
No.
Not that far behind.
Yeah.
I mean, again, you just totally forget the results. On the men's side of things, you mentioned DeCisa won. Jason Hartman was fourth.
Oh, that's right. Did he do that 2 years in a row or something like that? Or he was top American 2 years in a row? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of this results you just completely forget about. And then, of course, DeCisa comes back in, was it 2015, and then won again. Do I have that right? Because he next year Meb obviously got the win because DeCisa dropped out, but now he's a mainstay at that race.
Yeah. I this is just totally not off topic, but just trying to think of back of old memories. And I had never been to Boston for the marathon before 2015, but my high school cross country coach was, he's an avid masters runner. And in 2012 was the year that it was really, really hot. And I forget who won the elite races, but for his age group,
What's the
and he was
career, wasn't it?
Oh, it would have been career. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, of course. I don't know how I forget that. Yeah, that was the year. It was my high school coach, and I was in college at this point, but he won the masters race, and my sister was in high school at this time. And when he came back to school, whatever, next couple of days, over the PA announcer at my high school, they announced his name's Coach A. They announced him as the 2012 Boston Marathon champion, and that's it. I mean, it's just like, it's just another like show of, I mean, I think it was just some kid announcer, but it's just like, yes, our 47-year-old cross country coach just won the Boston Marathon. He did win his age group. He's a very good, he's like I think he ran like 240 on a day when it was 1,000,000 degrees. But anyways, that's just something I always remember.
Right in front of your eyes, you have a Boston Marathon champion. And now he's teaching math. Just incredible. Yeah. I mean, the thing that's so crazy about Boston is the weather seems to fluctuate between insanely hot and insanely cold.
Yeah. And it's like another thing in September, it's going to be probably pretty warm, but we won't have likely the volatility of it either being a 2018 type of a race where it's, it's like subarctic, or 2012 where it's summer in Dallas. So it's just it's just another adds a fun element, especially when you're not running it. Adds a fun element to the race. So there's just a lot of reasons it's special, not only because it's been around for 120 some years, and then not only because there's literally a holiday that's celebrated, Patriots Day, on race day. It's a whole different race than anything else I've ever come across.
When you bring up weather volatility at the top of the list, you have to talk about 2018, which was my one and only trip to the Boston Marathon. And man, was it memorable. I got there. I was working with Jojo Greshel. She got there early for the press conferences, which start Wednesday or something, Thursday of the week before the marathon. I mean, it gets going pretty early there.
Yeah.
I think I flew in on Saturday, so 2 days before the race, and they were already talking about how the weather was going to be bad. I don't think anybody envisioned it was going to have that impact on the race, though, of just a whole bunch of DNFs and very, very slow times. I remember walking and going out and about from my Airbnb to the hotel or wherever I was going, and just wind. It was like that type of like wind that kind of, when you're standing in a street corner, it knocks you in one direction. Like you literally can't stand up straight. And it was bad. And then it was worse on race morning. When I woke up, it was like the worst weather it had been. Now, ironically enough, the next day, Tuesday morning, when I woke up before I went and got my flight, it was really nice. The sun was coming out. It just goes to show you the whole course of running history was altered by the placement of one day, because man, my goodness, did this change everything in terms of people's careers.
Now, when you woke up on race day and the weather was obviously horrible, did you have a concept in your head that the weather was so bad that it was gonna, make the race, just alter the race so much into the measure that it did, where Des Linden won, and she won in what, like 2:37, 2:38, I'm sure you weren't thinking 2:39. I'm sure you weren't thinking those two were going to be the winners, but were you thinking that, oh my gosh, like droves of people are going to drop out, there's going to be hyperthermia going on?
No.
No. It's hard to think of that.
Yeah. No, and that's what I was saying. In the lead up, people were saying, oh, the weather's going to be bad. But then you don't apply that and be like, oh, that means there's going to be mass, DNFs, right? I mean, totally different weather scenario. But remember the hot Olympic trials in LA in 2016. People are like, it's going to be bad. And yeah, it was bad. And Flanagan was visibly struggling towards the end. But the they held it together. The people held it together who you thought were going to hold it together. This was a completely different beast. The first time, Lincoln, the first time I remember thinking, okay, we're going to have something crazy here, was when they showed the men's lead pack and Jeffrey Karui's jacket looked like a personal flotation device. And if he could go back in time and get a different jacket, I think the results of that race could have been altered, because he was puffed up like this. And the wind was just whipping in their face. I wasn't even really, I knew it was cold outside, but I wasn't even considering really the hypothermic element of it. But little by little, you saw people drop off. You saw people just completely bail on the race. The pace got really, really slow. Now, men's race was a little deceiving, right? Because you remember what Yuki did?
He went out hard. I mean, he was out by himself. Yeah.
I mean, now I remember talking to his manager after the race, and it was basically like they told him, this is the day you were born for. I mean, this was it. Like, he wanted it as messy as possible. And the surges up front wasn't to get his sponsor's jersey out there. Well, first of all, he wasn't really that sponsored, because remember, he was working full time still at the time. That was like deliberate. Like, he wanted to make this thing as hard as possible. So it was a little hard to judge pace. And you've covered these things before. You're sitting in a room with a bunch of TVs, you're hearing splits, but you're just not. It's not like being at a track meet where you could feel the weather, and you don't at track meet, you have other performances to gauge it to. Oh yeah, the 1500 went out slow because the wind on the backstretch is really bad. You really don't have a ton of information in the moment. That's what I remember thinking.
And tell me, you remind me more of, the race plan. You were talking with his agent or his manager, and his focus was kind of solely on Galen Rupp, right? I mean, he was kind of comparing himself. Obviously, in normal conditions, that wouldn't have been anywhere. Kawuchi would not have had any right to try to zero in on Galen Rupp. But in these conditions, knowing he was runner-up the year before, remind me again what that was.
I think it was just to try to make this thing as difficult as possible. So Yuki at the beginning of that year, remember, had gone to Boston to run some like one-person marathon. Do you remember this?
The Marshfield race or whatever, I think.
Yeah, he had gone to Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Yes. It was in Massachusetts. Now, that you could wrap up in the larger Yuki Kawauchi oeuvre of the guy just does weird, crazy things. He runs in a panda suit. He races in a business suit. He runs a marathon seemingly once every 2 weeks. And when he's not doing that, he's running a half marathon. All of that turned out to be the perfect preparation for what that Monday was in Boston, because the Monday in Boston was all about ridiculous. Like, imagine training your whole life. Imagine if that was your apex race, right? The race you've been training for your whole life, and you get on the start line and you probably just think, woe is me. This sucks. I trained for this. There's no way I could possibly train for this. Yuki's standing on the start line and he's thinking, everything I do is about whimsy and completely off the wall, ridiculous. Come up with the most insane scenario you can possibly throw in your head, and I'll take that and I'll make the best of it. So I think that was in his head, and that race that he ran in Massachusetts early in the year was the perfect preparation. I mean, look at what he's wearing on that day in Boston. He did not have a Jeffrey Karui blow up jacket.
No, he did not.
Yeah. Right. He was he was prepared. He was ready. I don't know if he looked at the weather models like 2 months out. I have to go back and look at the story to see if I asked him about that. But I think they just knew, okay, if this is going to be a really hard race with the weather, we're going to try to make it even harder by pushing the pace a little bit. And people let him go, and then they caught back up, and then he surged, and then he caught back up. But I mean, meanwhile, do you remember the women's race? What was going on in the women's race?
Well, Shalane Flanagan had to use the bathroom. Des Linden thought about dropping out. At certain points in the race, Shalane Flanagan didn't even know really where she was or what position in the race she was in. I, I think basically the entire country of Ethiopia dropped out of the women's race. I mean, basically Ethiopia dropped out full, completely on both the men's and the women's side. Other than that, no, I don't remember who else was. I don't remember who finished. I know Sellers second or third. I can't ever remember. Second. Okay. I mean, it was just all America on the men's and women's side as far as who was finishing the race, because East Africans were dropping out, and it was just crazy things were happening in the top. I mean, people that did not belong in the top 10 or the top 5 were finishing there because of these conditions. And even last year when I covered in 2019, it seemed like the media and the athletes still had post-traumatic stress from 2018. Now, we're always obsessed about the weather in Boston, but last year it was like, it could be similar. It could be similar. It didn't end up being that at all, but it was just, the weather was so dramatic. And I just never thought, I mean, you imagine okay, I suppose it could be like a blizzard and it could be, icing and things, and that could change the results. But I never would have thought it would have altered the results so significantly. Poor, really, really bad weather. But I mean, across the board, and I understand some of that is due to DNFs, but that just really opened my eyes to when things get really bad, the results are going to be way, way different than you anticipate.
You live by the point to point, you die by the point to point. And as good as it was and fortuitous as it was in 2011, it was flipped in 2018. So then it's in their face the entire way. The hypothermia is really what takes it to another level, right? I mean, Rupp, I don't remember how far he made it. Huddle, I don't remember. Huddle finished, I think, right? Did Huddle and Flanagan both finish? Yeah.
Yeah, they did. Yep.
I mean, Jordan Hasay dropped out before the race started, like the night before, which was a great decision in retrospect, because that would have been a lot of miles, a lot of good miles wasted. The men's field, you mentioned all of Ethiopia dropped out. The men's field, like if you look at the top 3, obviously it's crazy that Yuki won, but Jeffrey Karui held on for second and Biwott was third. Yeah. So it's like, okay, women's side of things, it was just wild because Linden, Sellers, and then Krista Duchesnay. So the Sellers and Duchesnay were both 2:44 is what they ran. I mean, I remember watching it and thinking, okay, the lead backs together. And then all of a sudden everything just disintegrated. And then you look up and you're like, what just happened? And I remember this, and I'm probably telling the story 2 different ways because I probably told it at the time after. So I probably should have listened to all the media I did after, but it was either the finish board. It was either the finish board or like the 35K split board when they put the women's names up, and Linden was winning. And we're like, oh my goodness, she has a chance to do this. And then you saw the rest of the leaderboard and it just looked like typos. Like it looked like, sometimes they get the mass race people mixed in, and someone behind me said, well, who's so-and-so? And I'm like, I don't know. That can't be right. Because it just happened. I mean, it happened gradually, but it also, you just kind of looked up one split and all the big names had bailed and were like, all right, I'm out. Yeah. Now the women finished before the men. Before the men, but I had no idea Linden was 5 minutes clear. I mean, she won by 5 minutes or 4 minutes.
It's ridiculous.
I mean, it wasn't close.
It's one of the most underrated aspects of that race, I feel like. I mean, it's just you forget the times because they were so slow, but the margin of victory was just absurd. I don't care what the conditions were. It's still pretty unbelievable. And of course, the men's margin of victory was not by comparison, but huge too. Didn't Kouichi run 2:15 and then
Karui was 2:18.
Yeah, 2:18. I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Also, 2:15, very good time for that weather. It's very good.
Well, 2:15:58 to 2:18:23. So about a minute or 2.5 minutes. Kouichi passed him kind of late in the race too.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
like all of that time was in that last mile to
Yep.
mile and a half from what I
Well,
remember.
because
So I
because
was,
I mean, I think Karui was like running like 7-minute pace at that point. He was actually
yeah.
running 5-minute pace, but his jacket was running 9-minute pace, so it leveled out. I don't know if he's been the
So,
same since. It's that might be his. That may be it for him.
so I'm trying to pay attention to the men's race because that's what I'm covering. JoJo's covering the women's race, right? But I'm just
Mhm.
completely shocked that Des Linden has won, and then I'm also completely shocked that the top 5 is who the top 5 looks like it's going to be. And
Right.
I'm wondering, where did everybody go? Like, what happened? Did they
Yeah.
take the wrong turn? And then I go, and now I have to turn my attention to the men's race. So the women's race finishes, and it's like, oh, okay, Yuki Keiichi is going to win. Of course, the panda suit guy, he's going to win this race. Like, that's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And then it was just equally ridiculous on the men's side from the perspective of, okay, this guy won. And then you look at the top 10 was kind of crazy. Top 5, again, not as crazy as the women's, just in terms of people we had never heard of. Credit to Karui for staying in. But I just remember thinking, how did this happen? Like, I still didn't have it. Because at that point, you still don't know, okay, everybody in Ethiopia DNF'd. You still don't know how many people actually had hypothermia. There was just a
Right.
lot of unanswered questions still. And then I remember to do interviews there, you go to the lobby of the top tier are in the press conference room, but then other people come in and people were shivering. Lincoln, do you remember? I don't know if
Oh
you have
yeah.
a memory of doing interviews in sort of the foyer there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's where it all kind of goes down. It's weird that not weird, but outside of the podium finishers, the top Americans and the top 3, it's a free for all. So I can only
Yeah,
imagine. Yeah, you get those those aluminum blankets or whatever those are, and then if you
yeah.
don't have your clothes, it's going to take a minute. So I can imagine that they were absolutely miserable with how cold it was.
So I found Meb was running it just for fun, and he just looked like he was freezing cold, and he was nice enough to stop for an interview. I remember Flanagan was in there. I think Huddle. There was you'll love this moment. Great moments in general sports reporting. Some guy found out, some Massachusetts TV guy found out Shalane Flanagan was from Massachusetts. Didn't know she was an Olympian, a New York City Marathon champion. Started interviewing her as if she was like a teacher at your high school who was in
Oh my
contention for the
goodness,
Boston Marathon.
it's
And so she's
incredible.
answering all these questions, and he goes, "So you're from Marblehead?" And she goes, "Yeah. I grew up from Massachusetts." Da, 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 da. And he's like, "And what'd you finish today?" And she said, "I don't know. Where did she end up finishing? Do you have that? Do you
I
have the
feel like
results in front of you?"
sixth to eighth, maybe. I can't. Yeah, I'll look it up. You can keep talking. I'll look it up.
So she's like, again, she's freezing cold. This race has not gone the way she wanted to. Her whole lifelong
Right.
dream has been to win Boston, but she's patiently answering all these questions. And then this guy finds out that this Massachusetts reporter finds out she's from Massachusetts, but thinks she's just Jane on the street. So then when she says that she got 7th or something, he's like, "Oh, that's
Sixth.
pretty good.
Sixth.
6th."
Sixth.
He goes,
Yeah.
6th. Wow, you got 6th. That's pretty good.
Oh,
And she
geez, that's
very
painful.
politely was like, "Yeah, I know. I was getting sort of secondhand embarrassment a little from it, and
Yeah.
I just was like, oh gosh." And she was nice. She was nice about it. She's like, "Yeah, I wanted more." Or like, she didn't say, "Do you know who I am?" Which is what I would have done.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course.
She
Naturally.
did not. She did not go to that level of like, "Why are you talking to me?" Like,
You do
I'm
that
just,
already, and it's really weird. But
yeah. That's probably why I
yeah.
don't get invited back to events. But
Yeah.
I did see JoJo tweeted something this morning, which I had totally forgotten. They had to tell reporters when Linden crossed the finish line not to cheer in the media room. I don't
No, geez.
remember that, but apparently it was pretty loud. But yeah, so the weather thing was a big story, and you could have picked any number of stories of all these random people who were finishing in the top 10. But the biggest one was an American woman won Boston for the first
Yeah.
time in decades, and that got overlooked a little bit, I think, in the short term. There, just because it was such a weird race and happened in such an unconventional fashion. That was just my impression of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was tempting to look at it as, oh, this was a fluke. But I mean, if anyone, Des Linden had very much, with her previous body of work, shown that was not a fluke. And regardless, you have to run the race that you're in. And she won by 5 minutes. So maybe she would have won, period. I mean, she's come close before when it was a quote unquote normal day, and a multiple time Olympian. And so, I mean, it was another day for her. I know she kind of, either fairly or not, gets branded as like a blue collar type of a runner because she's not a time trial person. And, you know, she's good at the Boston, New York type of a thing. That's more of her style. But, you know, that was no, you look back on it, that was certainly no fluke, even though the results behind her were totally altered. And obviously somebody on the men's side won that, you know, we never thought would have ever been possible. But she's consistently right there. She's consistently on her worst day, 6th place in a major marathon. So that is not a fluke. History should never record that as a fluke, because you could, right, anyone who would have won that race would have been, you know, okay, if Sarah Sellers would have won that race, it would have been a fluke, but it wasn't. And so the winner, you can't say that.
Other big winners from that day, Brooks Jackets.
That's correct. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
I mean, we all talk about shoe technology, but what about jacket technology there? I think that might have
Brooks
helped win the day
over Nike there. Yeah. Brooks got that win.
Jeffrey Curry almost just floated away when he got to the finish line because the wind just carried him away. What about last year? What do you remember about last year, other than the fact that people are still scared of the weather?
Yeah, I mean, Toronto versus DeCisa coming down to the last couple meters was a ton of fun. The name is, why is the name DeGefa breaking away early and just going out there and dominating. It's not going to be one of the memorable years, you know, especially compared to the kind of the American bias years that we're focusing on previously. But the exciting men's finish, I mean, having a race all the way down Boylston is incredible, because it's a very long stretch. When it's been other years where it's a blowout, you don't really think of Boylston being a long way to go. But just the back and forth between Toronto and DeCisa was one I'll remember for a while.
DeCisa always in the mix too.
Yeah.
He's always there.
Yeah. No, I mean, he won in 2015 when I was there, and I thought I was going to have to tell him afterwards, hey man, I'm your good luck charm, because I've been here both times you won. But Toronto just got him, and then Toronto won Chicago again.
Yeah. Toronto's been on a hot streak. It would have been interesting with the Olympics to see how he would have fared on that Kenyan team, depending on who they ultimately ended up selecting. I know they had a squad chosen, but it wasn't written in stone, because he doesn't have the big times like everybody else does, but he's doing it in these championship settings.
Hey, call me crazy, but I think that Kenyan men's team had some potential. So we'll see if they can keep it together for 2021.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about Boston is there's always something. And I know when you go to events, you're a cooler and you make the event
That's exactly right.
A little more matter of fact, a little more boring. You bring out the boringness in people, but even you couldn't slow things down, because those were just we basically just highlighted a few years, and obviously the more memorable ones. But every year there's some sort of crazy subplot or storyline that goes with that race. It feels like.
Yeah. Not, like I said, 2019 not super duper memorable, but I will remember the threat of the weather, like bringing up terrible memories for some, and you know, people are like, oh my gosh, it's going to be like that. It'd be like 2018 again, and then it flipping and being pretty nice. There was some rain, but it was a nice day. And 2020, who was it? Was the thought that who was supposed to race in 2020? Who was supposed to be in this one?
Linden. That's all I know.
Linden, but
I think Toronto was going to be back. I think DeGefa was going to be back. I mean, the American side was obviously the American side was depleted, obviously, because of the Olympic trials.
Right. Okay.
It was going to be like all Olympic year marathons. It was hard to figure out who was. I mean, London was going to be great because we knew we had Kipchoge, Bekele. all the
right.
other Olympic year marathons are tough to sort out, especially from an American perspective, because you're not getting everybody there. But yeah, if it is, hopefully it goes off in September, and maybe we see some of those people who made the Olympic team on the start line. I know Jake and I was talking about how a lot of the contracts were already locked in for the spring, but it'd be kind of cool to see Amali Seidel run that race,
Oh, for sure.
or Jake Riley. Yeah.
I could easily imagine her being in there. I mean, Boston, I think she's been living in Boston, so that would make all the sense in the world. She wore a Boston Red Sox hat to the post-race press conference, so that would be perfect for her. I got a question. Who do you think will be the next American, either men or women, to win Boston? I mean, Rupp's if you had to pick odds, it'd be Rupp, but who
Next
who could you
American to
see?
win Boston.
Yeah. I mean, you could pick Nico
So
Young. It could be that far in the future. I don't know. I mean, I'm just, I just am throwing anyone out
are we
there that you can imagine.
are we sure Rupp's retired? Or sorry, are we sure Meb's retired? Man, I ruined that joke. Okay. Next American to win Boston. Well, yeah, I mean, there's been an embarrassment of riches, right? You get the win in 14 and the win in 18. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, I think odds are it would come on the women's side of things. I would say. Although,
really,
well, here's the thing. Well, because I mean, the American women are deeper than the American men. That's not a controversial statement, but it goes against London. It goes head to head against London, and the London men's field is always so good that it leaves more spots for the men. Gosh, I'll say Emily Sisson.
That's a good pick. Yeah.
And she's going to do it in September this year. No,
wow, that would be quite the statement. No. They might have. Yeah, that'd be quite the turnaround from not making the team or not finishing in Atlanta. I would still pick Rupp just because he's been second before, and I think he's still in his prime, obviously. So
we're no doubt going to see some weird if that fall season goes off as normal. I think we're going to see an American win one of those majors, right? Just because the way the fields are going to break down. Sure. Yeah, and it'll probably be the London men's race. Probably the London men's race.
Probably. Yep. Yeah, I don't think Kipchoge's been training.
Abdi, don't sleep. Abdi over Kipchoge.
Yep.
Heard it here first. All right. That's it for today's show. The email address, FloTrackPodcast@gmail.com. You can write us in with your favorite Boston Marathon memories. Lincoln has taken his hat off. That means it's time to go. Thanks to Alon for producing. We'll talk to you guys next time.